Picture this, it's 1600 BC. The Mediterranean is thriving. Cities dot the coastline from Greece to Egypt. Ships cross the sea loaded with copper, tin, olive oil, wine. Palaces rise 5 stories high with indoor plumbing. Scribes keep records in 3 different writing systems. Artists paint frescoes that still take your breath away today. And then it all stops. Within a single generation, maybe 50 years, the entire Bronze Age world collapses. Not just one city, not one kingdom, the whole interconnected system. 40 major cities destroyed, most never rebuilt. Trade routes that had worked for 500 years just end. Writing disappears in some places for 4 centuries. We call it the Dark Ages for a reason. Here's what makes it so strange. This wasn't supposed to happen. These weren't primitive societies. The Mycenaeans in Greece built fortresses with walls so massive that later Greeks thought giants made them. The Hittites in Turkey had an empire that rivaled Egypt. They had treaties, diplomatic marriages, international law. They were advanced, and they vanished almost overnight. For a long time, nobody could explain it. Archaeologists found the burned cities. They could see the destruction. But what caused it? Invasion? Earthquake? Drought? The evidence pointed in too many directions at once. Some sites showed signs of attack. Others looked abandoned, like people just walked away. Some had earthquake damage, others didn't. The pattern made no sense. Then in the 1990s, researchers started putting pieces together. Not just archaeologists anymore, climate scientists, economists, systems theorists. They looked at the Bronze Age world differently. Not as separate kingdoms that happened to trade, but as a single complex system, like the global economy today. And complex systems, they don't fail gradually, they collapse all at once. Think about a house of cards. You can remove one card, maybe 2, and it stays standing. But there's a tipping point. Remove one more card, and the whole thing comes down. It doesn't matter which card you remove. The structure itself has become unstable. That's what happened in 1600 BC. The Bronze Age world depended on bronze. The name kind of gives it away. But here's the thing about bronze. It's not a natural metal. It's an alloy. You need copper and tin mixed together. And in the ancient world, copper and tin didn't come from the same places. Copper mines in Cyprus, tin mines in Afghanistan, or maybe Cornwall in Britain. Nobody's completely sure. But the tin had to travel thousands of miles to reach the copper, through multiple kingdoms, across dangerous seas, past pirates and bandits and rival empires. It worked because everyone needed it to work. You can't make weapons without bronze, can't make tools, can't make the goods you trade for food. So kingdoms protected the trade routes, made treaties, kept the peace because war would cut off their supplies, until something broke the system. We're finally starting to understand what that something was. And it wasn't just one thing, it was everything hitting at once. Climate change, earthquakes, migrations, pirate raids, political upheaval. Each problem made the others worse. The system couldn't handle it. The world's most advanced civilization didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it was too connected, too specialized, too dependent on everything working perfectly. And when it stopped working, there was no going back. The Minoans didn't just appear out of nowhere. They built something remarkable over centuries. Something that would make them the first true civilization in Europe. Their story starts on Crete, a big island in the Mediterranean. Not the biggest, but big enough. About 160 miles long. Mountains running down the middle. Fertile valleys. Good harbours. Close enough to Egypt and the Near East trade. Far enough away to stay independent. People had lived there for thousands of years. Farmers mostly. Small villages. Nothing special. Then, around 2700 BC, something shifted. The villages grew. They started building bigger structures, using better tools, making finer pottery. By 2000 BC, they were building palaces, not castles, not fortresses, palaces, huge sprawling complexes that covered acres. The one at Knossos had over 1,300 rooms, multiple stories, grand staircases, light wells that brought sunshine deep into the interior, drainage systems, storage magazines that could hold enough olive oil to feed thousands. These weren't just homes for kings, they were economic centres, administrative hubs, religious sites. Everything happened at the palace. Craftsmen worked in specialised workshops, scribes kept records, merchants stored goods, priests performed rituals. The whole community revolved around these massive buildings, and here's what's strange. No walls. Every other Bronze Age civilization built defensive walls. The Mycenaeans built walls so thick you could drive a chariot on top. The Hittites surrounded their cities with double walls and watchtowers. Even small towns had fortifications. Not the Minoans. Their palaces sat open to the world. No walls, no fortifications, no weapons caches. They either felt completely safe or they had a different idea about power. They got rich through trade. Really rich. Minoan pottery shows up everywhere in the ancient world. Egypt, Syria, Cyprus, Sicily, mainland Greece. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean carrying goods that everyone wanted. Olive oil was big. Crete had perfect conditions for olive trees. The Minoans pressed the oil and stored it in huge clay jars called pithoi. Some of these jars stood 6 feet tall. They held hundreds of gallons. The palace at Knossos had storage rooms lined with them. Enough oil to trade with half the Mediterranean. They also made textiles, fine wool cloth, linen, purple dye from sea snails, the kind of luxury goods that rich people paid premium prices for. And they made beautiful things. Pottery so fine you can see through it when you hold it to the light. Gold jewellery that modern jewellers study to figure out how they did it. Frescoes that capture movement and life in ways that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. The bull-leaping fresco shows exactly what it sounds like. Young people vaulting over charging bulls, grabbing the horns, flipping through the air, landing on the bull's back. It might have been sport, might have been ritual, might have been both. But it was dangerous and it was important enough to paint on palace walls. The dolphin fresco shows blue dolphins swimming through blue waves. Simple and elegant. The colours still bright after 3,600 years. Someone loved dolphins enough to cover a wall with them. The Prince of the Lilies shows a young man wearing a crown of lilies and peacock feathers, walking through a field of flowers. Scholars argue about whether it's actually a prince or a priest or maybe a goddess. But whoever it is, they look confident, powerful, at ease in their world. The Minoans had writing. 2 different scripts actually. Linear A came first. Hundreds of clay tablets covered in symbols. We can read the numbers. We know they were keeping records, tracking goods, recording transactions. But we can't read the language. It's not Greek. It's not related to any language we know. Linear A remains undeciphered. Later they developed Linear B. That one we can read because it's an early form of Greek, but Linear A stays mysterious. Like the Minoans themselves, they worshipped differently too. Most Bronze Age religions centred on male gods, sky gods, war gods, kings of the gods. The Minoans focused on goddesses. Female figures show up everywhere in their art. Snake goddesses holding serpents in both hands. Bare-breasted priestesses. Women leading rituals. Bulls were sacred. Bull horns decorated the palaces. Stylized horns called horns of consecration marked sacred spaces. The bull leaping might have been religious, a way to prove courage, to honour the bull, to connect with divine power. They held rituals in caves, in mountain peaks, in special rooms within the palaces. They left offerings, poured libations, danced and sang. Their religion involved nature and ecstasy and female power in ways that made them different from their neighbours. Their society seemed different too. The art shows women everywhere, not just in domestic scenes, women in public, women in positions of authority, women leading ceremonies, women in gardens and at festivals and in the front rows of important events. We can't know for sure what this means. Art doesn't always show reality, but the contrast with other Bronze Age cultures is striking. In Egypt, women could own property but rarely held political power. In Mesopotamia, women's rights declined over time. The Minoans painted women front and centre. Their cities spread across Crete. Knossos was the biggest but not the only palace. Phaistos in the south, Malea on the north coast, Zakros in the east. Each palace controlled its region. Each had storage facilities and workshops and administrative centres. They might have been independent city-states, or maybe one king ruled from Knossos, and the others paid tribute. We don't know. The Linear A tablets could tell us, but we can't read them. What we do know is they were connected. The palaces used similar architecture, similar administrative systems, similar religious symbols. Goods moved between them. Ideas spread. They were part of one culture even if they weren't one political unit. And they were peaceful, at least compared to everyone else. No evidence of major warfare between the palaces, no weapons in the graves, no fortifications, no war scenes in the art. They competed economically maybe, politically, but not militarily. This is weird. Every other Bronze Age civilization fought constantly. The Egyptians fought the Hittites fought the Assyrians, the Mycenaeans fought each other. City-states rose and fell through conquest. Kings proved themselves in battle. The Minoans proved themselves through trade, through art, through building bigger palaces with better plumbing. They influenced everyone around them. Mycenaean Greece borrowed Minoan styles. Minoan frescoes show up in Egyptian tombs. Minoan pottery shapes spread across the Mediterranean. They were trendsetters, cultural leaders, the civilization everyone else wanted to emulate. By 1600 BC, they were at their peak. The palaces were magnificent. Trade was booming. Art was flourishing. They'd been successful for 500 years. They had every reason to think it would continue. They had no idea what was coming. 70 miles north of Crete, an island was about to explode. An island that would change everything. An island that most people today have never heard of. Thera. We're all falling asleep to the same mysteries just hours apart. Tell me where you're from and what time it is. The algorithm doesn't love these long videos, but you do. That's what matters. So I'll keep making them. You keep listening and subscribe. And somewhere in the space between waking and sleep, between then and now, we'll figure out what happened to them. Now. Back to Thera. The island sits in the southern Aegean, about 70 miles north of Crete. Today we call it Santorini. Back then it was Thera. A different shape entirely. Not the crescent you see in tourist photos. A full circle, maybe 10 miles across. A volcano, but you couldn't tell by looking. The caldera was filled in, covered with soil. Forests grew on the slopes. Farms covered the valleys. A city rose on the southern coast. We know this city existed because we found it. Under 200 feet of volcanic ash and pumice. Perfectly preserved. Like Pompeii, but older. Much older. A Bronze Age town frozen in time. The excavation started in 1967. A Greek archaeologist named Spiridon Marinatos had a theory. He thought the Minoan collapse might be linked to a volcanic eruption. He knew Thera had blown up sometime in the Bronze Age. He wondered if the city beneath the ash might prove his theory. He was right about the city, wrong about almost everything else. They found streets, paved with flat stones, drainage channels running underneath, houses 2 and 3 stories tall, built from cut stone blocks fitted together without mortar. Wooden beams held up the upper floors. Those beams are gone now, burned away. But you can see where they were. The houses had windows, multiple rooms, storage areas in the basements, upper floors for living. Some had indoor toilets. Waste went down clay pipes into the street drains. Running water came from cisterns built into the walls. This wasn't primitive. This was sophisticated urban planning. The walls inside were plastered, then painted. Frescoes covered almost every surface. Not crude stick figures, real art. Detailed scenes showing daily life, ships sailing, people gathering flowers, boys boxing, fishermen hauling in their catch, antelopes leaping, swallows darting between cliffs. The colour still glow, red and yellow ochre, bright blue from ground lapis lazuli, white from lime, black from charcoal. After 3,600 years under ash, the pigments look fresh. You can see individual brush strokes. One fresco shows a whole town, multiple buildings, people in windows, ships in the harbour. It's like a snapshot, a moment captured. This is what life looked like here. This is what they saw every day. The pottery is everywhere. Thousands of vessels, storage jars taller than a person, cooking pots, serving dishes, cups, jugs, some plain, some decorated with spirals, dolphins, flowers. The clay is local, the shapes are Minoan. The style matches what they made on Crete. They found bronze tools, knives, saws, chisels, fishing hooks. The metal came from Cyprus, probably, shipped across the sea, worked by local smiths, sharp enough to use today, stone vessels carved from marble, bowls, cups, lamps. The marble came from the Cycladic Islands, Naxos maybe, or Paros. Someone quarried it, shipped it, carved it into useful shapes, weights for looms, clay spindle whorls, evidence of textile production. Wool, probably. Maybe linen. The actual fabric is gone, but the tools remain. No gold, no silver, no precious metals at all. Either they took it when they left, or this wasn't a wealthy town. Comfortable, yes, but not rich. Here's what they didn't find. Bodies. Not one. Not even fragments. No skeletons in the houses. No remains in the streets. Everyone left before the eruption. They had time to pack, time to evacuate, time to get away. They also didn't find food. The storage jars are empty. The houses are clean. Too clean. This wasn't sudden. This was organised, deliberate. They knew something was coming. The city covers about 50 acres. Maybe 30,000 people lived here at its peak. Probably fewer when it ended. A decent-sized town. Important enough to have paved streets and fancy frescoes. Not important enough to be mentioned in any records we've found. It sat on the southern coast. The harbour would have been good. Deep water, protected from north winds. Ships could anchor safely, load and unload cargo. The town probably lived off trade. Fishing, maybe some farming in the fertile valleys inland. The architecture is pure Minoan. Same building techniques as Crete, same layout, same style. But this wasn't a Minoan colony, not exactly. The pottery is local. The frescoes show local scenes. This was a Cycladic town that adopted Minoan culture. Or maybe it was always part of the Minoan world. The line between influence and control gets blurry. What matters is the connection. Thera and Crete were linked. Culturally, economically, probably politically. What happened to one affected the other. When Thera exploded, Crete felt it. The volcano had been quiet for thousands of years. long enough that people forgot it was dangerous, long enough to build a city on its slopes. But volcanoes don't forget. They just wait. Sometime around 1600 BC, the mountain woke up. We know this from the ash layers. The eruption happened in stages. First, small earthquakes, probably felt for weeks or months before, the kind that crack walls, knock things off shelves, make people nervous. Then the ground started to bulge, magma pushing up from below, the pressure building. Springs might have dried up, or started flowing hot. Animals would have acted strange, birds leaving, dogs barking at nothing. The signs were there. The first explosions were small, ash and steam, probably scared people, probably made them think about leaving. Some did. The empty storage jars suggest people had time to pack food, to gather valuables, to organise an evacuation. Then it got worse, much worse. The main eruption was one of the largest in human history. The volcano didn't just erupt, it exploded. The entire top of the mountain blew off. The magma chamber underneath emptied. The ground collapsed into the void. The island imploded. The ash column rose 20 miles into the sky, maybe higher. Pumice rained down for hours, then days. The ash buried everything, the city, the farms, the forests. All of it disappeared under hundreds of feet of volcanic debris. The caldera filled with seawater. The circular island became a crescent. The harbour vanished. The southern coast where the city stood dropped into the sea. Everything the people had built was gone, erased, buried so deep it would stay hidden for 3,600 years. But here's the thing, the people survived. They got away. They had warning. They evacuated. The empty city proves it. They left in time. Where did they go? Probably Crete, maybe other islands. Some might have gone to mainland Greece. They were sailors. They had boats. They could reach safety. They just couldn't take their homes with them. The city under the ash tells us something important. The Minoans knew their world was dangerous. They built beautiful things. Anyway, they painted frescoes on walls that would be buried. They paved streets that would disappear. They created art and culture in the shadow of a volcano. They didn't know when it would erupt. They couldn't predict it. They just lived their lives, fished, traded, raised families, made pottery, painted walls, did the daily work of being human. And when the mountain finally woke up, they grabbed what they could and ran. The city is called Crete now, after the modern village nearby. You can visit it, walk the ancient streets, see the frescoes, stand in houses where people lived 3,600 years ago. It's covered by a protective roof now, climate-controlled, carefully preserved. It's strange walking through it. The streets are narrow, the doorways low, the rooms small by modern standards. But the sophistication is obvious. The planning, the craft, the attention to beauty. These were people who cared about more than survival. They cared about living well. The frescoes are the most striking, not just because they're beautiful, but because they're so alive. The people in them are moving, dancing, working, playing. They're not stiff or formal. They're caught in motion, in the middle of doing something, like someone pressed pause on a film. One shows young boys boxing, they wear gloves, follow rules. This is sport, not fighting. Another shows women gathering saffron. Their dresses are elaborate, their hair styled. They're taking time to look nice while doing farm work. These are people who valued grace, style, doing things properly. The ship fresco is remarkable. It shows a fleet sailing between towns. People wave from the shore. Dolphins swim alongside. It's a celebration, a festival maybe, or a regular trading voyage important enough to commemorate. Either way, It shows a world connected by sea. Towns talking to each other, ships moving between them, an integrated society. This was the world the Minoans built, not just on Crete, but across the islands, a network of towns and cities linked by trade and culture. Thera was part of it, not the centre, but connected, important enough to have fine art and good plumbing, wealthy enough to import bronze and marble, confident enough to build permanent stone houses on the slopes of a volcano. That confidence would prove misplaced, but they couldn't have known. They built the best they could with what they understood. They created beauty. They lived well. And when disaster came, they survived it. The city died. The people didn't. That matters. Because what happened next wasn't about the eruption. It was about what came after. The ash that buried Thera didn't bury Crete. The tsunami that followed didn't destroy the palaces. The Minoans survived the volcano. What they couldn't survive was everything that followed. The warning signs started months before, maybe a year. Small earthquakes rattling the island, not big ones, just enough to crack plaster, knock clay pots off shelves, wake people up at night. The Therans knew what earthquakes meant. They'd lived on this island for generations. They understood the ground could shake. But these tremors were different, more frequent, building in intensity, coming in clusters that made the whole island feel unstable. Springs changed temperature, cold water sources turned warm, some dried up completely, others started bubbling, releasing gases that smell like sulphur, like rotten eggs. Animals noticed first. Dogs barking at nothing, birds abandoning their nests, fish disappearing from the usual spots. Then the ground started to rise. Not everywhere, just in certain areas. The beach near the harbour shifted upward. Boats that used to float at high tide suddenly scraped bottom. Fishermen noticed their landmarks changing. Cliffs that used to line up a certain way looked wrong, off by a few degrees. This wasn't normal. This was the mountain waking up. The first actual eruption was probably small, a vent opening somewhere on the island, steam and ash shooting into the air, loud enough to hear across the whole island, scary enough to make people think seriously about leaving. Some did. The archaeological evidence shows this wasn't a sudden evacuation. People had time, they packed systematically, took their food, gathered valuables, organised who would go where. This took weeks, maybe months. The earthquakes got worse, stronger, more frequent. Buildings started to fail, not collapsing, just cracking, walls developing fissures, doorways going crooked. The kind of damage that makes a house unsafe but not immediately deadly. More people left, probably in waves. First the cautious ones, then families with small children, then anyone who had relatives on other islands. They loaded boats with whatever they could carry, sailed for Crete, for Knossos, for anywhere that wasn't shaken apart. The ones who stayed were either stubborn or had nowhere to go, or maybe they thought the worst was over. Volcanoes sometimes give false alarms, rattle and smoke for a while, then go quiet again. Maybe they hoped this was one of those times. It wasn't. The main eruption happened in stages. We know this from studying the ash layers. 4 distinct phases, each one worse than the last. Phase 1 was Plinian, named after Pliny the Younger, who described Vesuvius centuries later. A column of ash and gas shooting straight up, powered by the pressure of magma meeting groundwater. The explosion turns rock into powder, hurls it miles into the sky. The column from Thera reached at least 20 miles high, maybe 25, high enough to punch into the stratosphere. The ash spread out at the top like an umbrella, blocking the sun, turning day into twilight. Pumice started falling. light volcanic rock full of air bubbles. It floated on water, rained down on the island like hail. Small pieces at first, then bigger, fist-sized chunks, then rocks the size of your head. They piled up fast, inches per hour, then feet. This phase lasted hours, maybe a full day. Anyone still on the island would have taken shelter, huddled in basements, under tables, anywhere with a roof. The pumice kept falling. The weight started collapsing roofs, burying streets, filling rooms. If anyone was still alive on Thera at this point, they died now, crushed by falling debris, suffocated by ash, buried alive in their own homes. But the evidence suggests the island was already empty. The evacuation had worked. The people got away. What died was the city, the buildings, the infrastructure, everything they'd built over centuries. Phase 2 brought pyroclastic surges. These are different from the falling pumice. These are ground-hugging clouds of hot gas and ash. They flow like water, follow valleys, pour over ridges, move at hundreds of miles per hour. The temperature inside a pyroclastic surge reaches 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to instantly ignite anything flammable. Hot enough to boil water in your blood. Nothing survives. Not plants, not animals, not people if there had been any left. The surges swept across Thera, scoured the landscape, burned everything organic, left a layer of fine ash over the pumice. This is what preserved the frescoes. The hot ash sealed them, protected the paint, locked the colours in place for 3,600 years. Phase 3 was worse. The eruption column collapsed. The pressure couldn't sustain it anymore. The whole thing came crashing down. Billions of tons of ash and rock falling at once, creating pyroclastic flows. These are denser than surges, heavier, more destructive. They buried what was left of the city under hundreds of feet of debris, filled valleys, levelled hills, reshaped the entire island. The landscape the Therans knew disappeared, erased completely. And then came Phase 4, the caldera collapse. The magma chamber under Thera was huge, miles across. When it emptied during the eruption, it left a void, a hollow space deep underground. The rock above couldn't support itself. It fell. The entire centre of the island dropped into the sea. Imagine standing on the shore of a neighbouring island, watching Thera across the water. You've seen the ash column. Watch the pyroclastic flows. The island is already devastated, and then the middle just drops, falls into itself. The circular island becomes a crescent. The caldera fills with seawater. Waves surge outward in all directions. This created the tsunami. Multiple tsunamis, actually. The first wave came from the caldera collapse itself. Water rushing in to fill the void, then rushing back out, then in again. Each surge sending waves across the Aegean. The waves weren't like normal ocean swells. These were different, faster, steeper, powered by the displacement of billions of tons of seawater. They radiated outward at hundreds of miles per hour. The first islands they hit were the nearest Cyclades, Ios, Sikinos, Folegandros, small islands with small populations. The waves were already 30 or 40 feet high. They swept over beaches, flooded coastal settlements, destroyed boats, killed anyone who didn't run inland fast enough. But these islands were small. The waves passed them quickly, kept moving, spreading out, losing some energy, but still massive, still deadly. Crete was 70 miles south. The waves took maybe 30 minutes to get there, maybe less. Not much warning time, but some. People on the north coast would have felt the earthquakes from Thera, seen the ash cloud, watched the sky turn dark. Smart ones might have moved inland, away from the beach, up into the hills. The ones who stayed near the coast saw the water pull back first, the sea retreating, exposing the sea floor, fish flopping in the mud, boats lying on their sides. This happens before tsunamis. The water pulls back before it rushes in. Then the wave came. Accounts from other volcanic tsunamis describe walls of water. Not break-in waves like surfers ride. Solid walls. The whole ocean lifting up and moving forward. Unstoppable. Inevitable. The wave that hit Crete was probably 30 to 50 feet high. Some estimates go higher, 100 feet in places where the coast funneled it. Bay shapes can amplify tsunami height, turn a 30-foot wave into a 100-foot wall. The wave swept inland, flooded coastal towns, destroyed harbours, smashed ships, drowned people and animals. The water carried debris, rocks, wood, pieces of buildings. It scoured everything in its path. Then it pulled back, dragging wreckage with it. Bodies, boats, whole structures torn from their foundations. The water retreated to the sea, taking everything with it. But it wasn't over. Tsunamis come in sets, multiple waves. Sometimes the second or third is the biggest. The water pulled back again, then surged forward, then back, then forward. This continued for hours, each wave doing more damage, reaching further inland, destroying what the previous waves had weakened. The north coast of Crete took the worst of it. That's where the palaces were. Knossos, Malea, Zakros, all facing north, all vulnerable to waves from Thera. Archaeological evidence shows flooding, tsunami deposits, layers of sand and marine shells found inland, mixed with building debris, dated to exactly this period, around 1600 BC, the same time as the Thera eruption. But here's the thing, the palaces survived. Damaged, yes. Flooded, definitely, but not destroyed. The waves didn't reach far enough inland. Knossos was a couple miles from the coast, protected by hills. The water got there. But it was spread out by then, weakened. It flooded the lower levels, destroyed some outbuildings, but the main palace stood. The same was true across Crete. Coastal towns got hammered, harbours destroyed, ships lost, people drowned. But the major centres survived. The civilization didn't collapse. Not from this. Not yet. The ashfall was worse in some ways. The wind carried it east and south, covered eastern Crete in a layer of volcanic debris. Not thick like on Thera, just a few inches in most places, but enough to ruin crops, poison water sources, make the land temporarily unusable. Farmers would have struggled, one bad harvest, maybe two, food shortages, economic stress. But not collapse, not extinction. Civilizations can survive bad harvests. They have storage, trade networks, ways to cope. The Minoans coped. They rebuilt the damaged harbours, replaced the lost ships, cleaned the ash from their fields. Within a generation, maybe two, things were mostly back to normal. The palaces were repaired, trade resumed, life continued. So the eruption didn't destroy the Minoans. Not directly. The tsunami didn't end their civilization. The ash didn't starve them out. They survived. They recovered. They kept going, which means the real mystery isn't why the eruption destroyed them. It's why they collapsed anyway, a century later, maybe less, when the immediate crisis was over, when they should have been safe. Something else happened, something we're still trying to understand. The volcano was just the beginning. The tsunami moved across the Aegean like nothing anyone had ever seen. Not a wave, a series of waves, each one different, each one deadly in its own way. The first wave came fast, 20 minutes after the caldera collapsed, maybe 30. The water had been pulled toward Thera when the island fell. Now it rushed back out, spreading in all directions, moving at the speed of a jet plane. Open ocean tsunamis don't look like much. Ships can pass right over them without noticing. The wave is long, stretched out, maybe only a few feet high in deep water, but it's moving fast, and it carries enormous energy. That energy becomes visible when the wave hits shallow water. The sea floor slows the bottom of the wave. The top keeps moving. The wave compresses, rises up, gets taller and steeper. By the time it reaches the coast, it's a wall of water. The nearest island saw it first, Anafi, just 15 miles east of Thera. The wave was still compact, concentrated, maybe 100 feet high when it hit. It swept over the entire island. Nothing survived below 300 feet elevation. Every coastal settlement gone, every harbour destroyed, every boat smashed or carried inland. The people who lived there had maybe 10 minutes warning. They would have felt the earthquakes, seen the ash cloud, heard the roar of the eruption. Some probably ran for the hills. Others froze, couldn't process what was happening, died where they stood. Ios was next, 20 miles from Thera. The wave had spread out a bit, lost some height, but still massive, still deadly. It hit the south coast first, flooded valleys, climbed hillsides. The water reached half a mile inland in some places, carrying rocks, trees, pieces of buildings from Anafi. Then it pulled back. That's the thing about tsunamis people forget. The water doesn't just come in, it goes back out. And when it retreats, it takes everything with it. Soil, vegetation, animals, people, whole structures torn from their foundations, all of it dragged back to sea. The second wave came while the water from the first was still draining. They collided, created chaos, currents moving in multiple directions at once, whirlpools, standing waves. The sea became a churning mess of debris and foam. Naxos took the hit next. Bigger island, more people. The wave was maybe 50 feet high when it arrived, still enough to devastate the coast. The main town faced north, directly toward Thera. The wave funneled into the harbour, amplified by the bay shape, rose to 80 feet, maybe more. The harbour was full of ships, dozens of them, trading vessels, fishing boats, warships. They were tied to docks, pulled up on beaches. The wave picked them up like toys, smashed them together, drove them inland, used them as battering rams against buildings. One ship ended up a quarter mile from the water, sitting in the middle of what used to be a residential district. Crushed houses beneath it. The water drained away, left the ship there, high and dry, a monument to the power of the sea. The southern Cyclades got hit hard. Milos, Kimalos, Sifnos. Each island had coastal settlements. Each settlement was destroyed. The waves varied in height depending on the coastline. Bays amplified them. Headlands deflected them. Some towns got lucky. Others were erased. The waves kept spreading, moving outward from Thera in expanding circles, losing energy as they went, but still dangerous, still deadly. Even a 10-foot tsunami can kill. Rhodes was 150 miles away. The wave took over an hour to get there. By then it was maybe 20 feet high, still enough to flood the coastal areas, destroy the harbour, drown people who didn't get to high ground. The Dodecanese islands all took damage, Kos, Kalymnos, Patmos, small waves by tsunami standards, 10 to 15 feet. But these islands weren't prepared. They had no warning system, no evacuation plans. People lived right on the beach, fished from the shore, built their houses where the view was good. The waves came at different times depending on distance and geography. Some islands got hit an hour after the eruption, others 3 hours later. The waves bounced off coastlines, reflected back, interfered with each other, created complex patterns that are hard to predict even with modern computers. The Turkish coast saw the tsunami too. Bodrum, Marmaris, Fethiye. The wave had travelled 200 miles by then, lost most of its power, but it still flooded harbours, damaged ships, caused panic. People who saw it described the water pulling back first, the sea retreating hundreds of yards, exposing the bottom, fish everywhere, boats lying on their sides, then the roar, a sound like thunder, like a freight train, the wave coming in, not breaking, just rising. A wall of water that kept coming and coming. The water was full of debris by this point, pieces of thera, pumice floating on the surface, ash mixed with seawater creating a grey sludge, trees, dead animals, parts of buildings, all of it carried by the wave, deposited on shores hundreds of miles from where it started. Egypt was 500 miles south. The wave took 3 hours to get there. By then it was small, maybe 5 feet, but the Nile Delta is flat, low-lying. The wave pushed up the river mouths, flooded farmland, destroyed fishing villages. The Egyptians recorded it, called it a great flood, blamed it on angry gods. The wave even reached the Levant, modern-day Lebanon, Syria, Israel, small by then, just a few feet, but enough to notice, enough to damage coastal areas, enough to scare people. And Crete, always Crete, the biggest target, the most important, the place where the Minoan civilization was centered. The north coast faced Thera directly, took the full force of the waves. The first one arrived maybe 30 minutes after the caldera collapsed. The sea pulled back first, exposed the harbour floors, boats settled onto mud. People stood and watched, confused, frightened. Then the wave came, 40 feet high in most places, higher in bays and inlets. It swept inland, flooded the coastal plain, destroyed everything within half a mile of the shore. Houses, warehouses, workshops, temples, all gone. The harbour at Knossos was completely destroyed. This was the main port for Knossos. Ships from across the Mediterranean docked here, loaded and unloaded cargo. Now it was rubble. The docks torn away, the breakwaters smashed, ships driven inland or dragged out to sea. Malea was hit hard. The palace there sat close to the coast. The wave reached the outer walls, flooded the lower levels, destroyed the port facilities. The palace survived, but barely. The damage was extensive. It would take years to repair. Zakros on the east coast faced a different problem. The wave came from the north but wrapped around the island, hit from multiple directions. The palace there was right on the beach. The wave went straight through it, flooded every room. The people had evacuated earlier. Nobody died, but the building was ruined. Knossos was far enough inland to survive. The wave reached it but weakened, maybe 10 feet high by the time it got there. It flooded the lower levels, destroyed some outbuildings, but the main palace stood. The walls held. The structure remained intact. The same pattern played out across Crete. Coastal areas devastated. Inland areas damaged but surviving. The civilization took a massive hit. But it didn't collapse. Not yet. Not from this. The waves kept coming for hours. 6 major waves, maybe more. Each one reaching further inland than normal high tide. Each one carrying debris. Each one pulling back and taking more with it. The coast was scoured, stripped clean. Everything portable was gone. When the sea finally calmed, the damage was clear. Every harbour on the north coast destroyed. Every coastal town damaged or gone. Hundreds of ships lost. Thousands of people dead. The fishing industry wiped out. The maritime trade network broken. But the interior was okay. The farms still worked. The palaces still stood. The people who survived could rebuild. And they did. They cleared the debris, repaired the buildings, built new harbours. Within a generation, trade resumed. Ships sailed again, life continued. The tsunami deposits tell the story. Layers of sand and marine shells found inland, mixed with pumice from Thera, dated to exactly this moment, around 1600 BC. The evidence is clear. The waves hit. They hit hard. They caused massive damage. But they didn't end the Minoans. That's the part that confuses people. The eruption and tsunami should have been enough, should have destroyed the civilization completely. But they didn't. The Minoans survived, adapted, kept going. Which raises the question, if the volcano didn't destroy them, what did? Why did they collapse a century later? What finished what Thera started? The answer isn't simple. It never is with civilizations. They don't fall because of one thing. They fall because of many things, stacked up, compounding, creating a cascade of failures that nobody can stop. The tsunami was part of it, a big part. It destroyed infrastructure that took centuries to build. It killed people who had irreplaceable skills. It broke trade networks that couldn't be easily repaired. It created economic stress, social upheaval, political instability. But it wasn't fatal, not by itself. The Minoans were resilient. They had resources. They had knowledge. They had time. They should have recovered. Many civilizations have survived worse. So what happened? What turned a survivable disaster into a civilization-ending catastrophe? That's what we need to understand. That's where the real mystery begins. The waves eventually stopped. The water calmed. The survivors emerged from the hills. They looked at what remained, started the long process of rebuilding. They didn't know they were living in the beginning of the end. Nobody ever does. When you look at the end of the Minoans, it isn't a single moment. It's not just a city burning or a palace falling. It's a long slide, almost like watching something slowly fade out. The volcano hit them hard. The tsunami wrecked their coasts. But the real collapse took 100 years. It was a slow-motion disaster. That's what makes it so mysterious, and honestly, so interesting. Let's start with what happened right after the eruption. The Minoans tried to recover. They rebuilt harbours, fixed damaged towns, and grew crops again. The palaces inland survived. Knossos, for example, was mostly untouched by the waves. People kept living there, trading, worshipping their gods. On the surface, things looked okay. But underneath, everything had changed. The first big problem was the loss of their fleet. Minoan ships weren't just for fishing or moving goods. They were the glue that held their world together. These ships connected Crete to Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant and the Greek mainland. Losing hundreds of ships in one day meant losing trade partners, raw materials, and even news from far away. Imagine suddenly being cut off from the outside world. The things you took for granted, tin for bronze, fine textiles, rare foods, just stopped arriving. Trade wasn't just about stuff. It was about relationships. If you can't send gifts to foreign rulers, if you can't show up in a new port, people start to forget about you. Or worse, they start to see you as weak. And in the ancient world, weakness is dangerous. Pirates notice. Rival kingdoms notice. Even your neighbours start to wonder if they should trust you. The economy took a hit right away. With fewer ships, less trade, and damaged ports, people started to struggle. There wasn't enough work for everyone. Food might have been okay at first, but over time, shortages spread. The Minoans had built their society on abundance. Suddenly, that abundance was gone. And then there was the ash. The eruption dumped tons of volcanic ash across Crete and neighbouring islands. The closer you were to Thera, the thicker the layer. In some places it was over a foot deep. Farmers couldn't plant for years. The soil became hard and strange. Rain mixed with ash to form a crust that crops couldn't break through. Even animals suffered. Grazing land shrank. People had to work much harder for less food. So you have a civilization that had always relied on the sea. Suddenly, the sea is dangerous. The land is damaged. The economy is shrinking. And the people who survived the first disaster now face a series of slow, grinding problems. It's almost like the eruption was just the opening act. The real collapse took time. Now let's talk about the palaces. These weren't just royal homes. They were the centres of Minoan life. Everything important happened there. Religion, trade, art, politics. The biggest palaces like Knossos, Melia and Phaistos were like entire cities under one roof. They managed grain storage, craft workshops and religious ceremonies. If something broke in the palace system, the whole society felt it. After the eruption, the palaces kept going for a while. Archaeologists have found signs of rebuilding and repairs. But when you look closer, you start to see cracks. Storage rooms weren't as full. The fancy pottery styles stopped appearing. Artwork became simpler, less colourful. Writing, those mysterious clay tablets covered in linear script, became rare. It's almost like people lost interest in keeping records. Why would that happen? Some historians think it was a leadership problem. Maybe the kings and queens lost their power. Maybe the priests couldn't explain the disasters. When people lose faith in their leaders, things fall apart fast. Others think it was a problem of resources. If the palaces had nothing left to give, people might have just walked away. There's another angle to consider. War. The Minoans were famous for not building big walls around their cities. They relied on their navy to protect them. Once that navy was gone, they were exposed. The Greek mainland, especially the Mycenaeans, was getting stronger. Raiders could land almost anywhere. The Minoans had to defend themselves in ways they weren't used to. Evidence shows that after the eruption, more weapons started showing up in Minoan sites. Swords, spears, armour. People started building small fortifications. It looks like life got more violent. Maybe people were fighting over land, food, or even control of the palaces. Maybe outsiders invaded. There are signs of burned buildings, sudden destruction layers, and abandoned towns. Disease also could have played a part. When a disaster hits, people crowd into safer areas. They live closer together. Clean water and food are harder to find. Disease spreads faster. We don't have written records telling us about plagues, but skeletons from this period show signs of malnutrition and illness. And then there's climate. Some scientists believe the Thera eruption changed the weather for years. The ash cloud could have cooled the planet, causing colder, wetter winters or dry summers. Crop failures might have become common, not just in Crete, but across the eastern Mediterranean. Famines rarely hit just one place. When food is short everywhere, nobody can help you. So, let's add this up. First, a huge disaster wipes out the navy, destroys crops, and damages ports. Then, the economy shrinks, trade slows, and the old leaders lose their power. Violence increases, disease and hunger follow, the weather turns against you. Each problem makes the others worse. It's not a single event, it's a chain reaction. Now, about 50 years after the eruption, something big changes. Archaeologists call it the final palace period. This is when the last great palaces were rebuilt or repaired. The artwork changes, the pottery isn't as fine. The writing system, Linear A, starts to disappear. And then, around 1450 BC, most of the palaces are violently destroyed, not by earthquakes or tsunamis, by fire and weapons. Knossos is the only one left standing. The others, Melia, Phaistos, Zakros, are burned to the ground. People abandon them. The survivors flee, maybe to the hills, maybe to smaller villages. Some go to the Greek mainland, Some simply vanish from history. So who did it? The most popular theory is invasion. The Mycenaeans from mainland Greece were getting stronger at this time. Their pottery suddenly appears in Crete. Their weapons, their art styles, even their writing system, Linear B, start to show up. Linear B is a script that we can read. It's an early form of Greek. Suddenly the old Minoan language disappears and Greek takes over. It looks like the Mycenaeans took control of Knossos. They turn the last palace into their base. The economy changes. The religion changes. Even the way people are buried changes. The Minoan culture is still there, but it's blended with Greek ways. Within a generation or two, the old traditions are gone. But invasion isn't the whole story. Some archaeologists aren't convinced. They point out that the Mycenaeans might have been in Crete even before the palaces burned. Maybe they were trading partners, not conquerors at first. Maybe they slipped into power as the Minoans weakened. Or maybe the violence was started by local groups fighting over what was left, and the Mycenaeans just stepped in when the dust settled. There's also a theory about social collapse. When systems get too complex and resources get tight, things can fall apart from inside. People lose trust in leaders, factions form, local rulers fight for power. The big cities break up into smaller, less organized communities. Over time, the skills and knowledge needed to run a palace society fade away. Another possibility is that people simply walked away. If life in the palace towns became too hard, too violent, too poor, too uncertain, maybe families decided they were better off in the countryside, farming small plots, raising goats, staying under the radar. Over a few generations, the memory of the old palaces would fade. People would tell stories about a golden age, but nobody would really know what happened. So which theory is right? The truth is probably a mix of all of them. Disaster, war, famine, disease, leadership failure, outside pressure. Each played a part. The eruption set off a crisis, but the system was already fragile. The Minoans depended on trade, on peace, on good weather, and on strong leaders. When those things vanished, their world fell apart. The collapse looks different depending on where you stand. In the villages far from the coast, people kept farming. They survived, but their lives became simpler. In the ruins of the palaces, you find signs of hurried abandonment, half-finished meals, valuables left behind, even skeletons crushed under fallen walls. In the new settlements that appeared later, the art is less fancy. The houses are smaller. The writing stops for hundreds of years, and then there's the cultural loss. This is the part that's hardest to measure. The Minoans made amazing art, frescoes of dolphins, women with curling hair, acrobats flipping over bulls. They wrote in a language we still can't read. They built buildings that lasted thousands of years. When their civilization fell, much of that knowledge disappeared with them. After the collapse, the Greeks remembered Crete as a place of myth. The palaces became the setting for stories. King Minos, the labyrinth, the Minotaur, Daedalus and Icarus. But the real details faded. Even for the Greeks, the Minoans became legends. And for centuries after, Crete was a shadow of its old self. The people who lived there were farmers and herders, not merchants or artists. The big ships stopped coming. The old ports filled with sand. The palaces crumbled. No one rebuilt them. If you dig into the ground today, you find layers that tell the story. Volcanic ash, burned buildings, broken pottery, layers where people lived in crowded huts instead of big houses. The change is clear, but the reasons are complicated. So, what can we learn from all this? Civilizations are tough, but they're also fragile. They depend on things working together. Trade, leadership, good luck with weather, strong relationships with neighbors. When too many things go wrong at once, even the strongest society can collapse. It's not usually one big disaster that does it. It's the way problems pile up. The Minoans survived the eruption, but not everything that came after. The real story is about resilience and limits, about how people adapt, and sometimes about how they can't. I think about this sometimes. We always imagine ancient people as so different from us. But they were just trying to make life work day by day. They built, they traded, they hoped. When disaster came, they tried to adapt. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The Minoans left behind empty palaces and lost languages. They also left stories that echo through history. Their fall isn't just about destruction. It's about how things change, how cultures can vanish, but traces remain. And that's the real puzzle. Not just how they fell, but what was lost when they did. That's what makes the collapse of the Minoans more than just an old mystery. It's a reminder that even the most advanced cultures are never safe from change. Next, we'll look at what exactly disappeared, and how that loss turned into the legend of Atlantis. Let's talk about something strange and kind of magical. How the story of the Minoans turned into the legend of Atlantis. It's one of those mysteries that keep showing up in movies, books, and late-night conversations. People have searched for Atlantis for centuries. Some imagine it as a lost city under the sea. Others think it's buried somewhere on land, waiting to be found. But if you look at the evidence, the link between Atlantis and the Minoan world is more than just a wild guess. There's a real connection here, and the story is full of twists. Let's start with what Plato actually said. He's the main reason we even talk about Atlantis. Plato was a Greek philosopher, living around 400 BC, over 1,000 years after the Minoans were gone. In two of his books, Timaeus and Critias, he described Atlantis as a powerful island civilization. It was rich, advanced, and ruled the sea. Then, in a single day and night, it vanished beneath the waves. Now, here's the first weird thing. The way Plato describes Atlantis sounds a lot like what we know about the Minoans. He talks about a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That's what the Greeks called the Straits of Gibraltar. But he also describes a place with palaces, advanced plumbing, beautiful art, and ships everywhere. A place that traded far and wide. A place with bull games and a powerful navy. All of those things fit the Minoans almost perfectly. But there's a catch. Plato says Atlantis fell 9,000 years before his time. That would put it way before the Bronze Age, long before cities even existed. Most historians think that number is just a mistake, or maybe a way to make the story sound even older and more mysterious. Some think Plato was just using big numbers to make a point. So, was Plato writing about the Minoans, or was he making the whole thing up? That's the big question. Let's break down the details. First, the setting. The Minoans lived on Crete, the biggest island in the eastern Mediterranean. They built huge palaces, created complex art, and ruled the seas with their ships. Their towns had running water, flush toilets, and colourful frescoes. They worshipped gods and goddesses, loved bulls, and traded with Egypt, Turkey, and Greece. Now, listen to how Plato describes Atlantis. He says it was an island with a big central city, surrounded by rings of water and land. The city had palaces, temples, and advanced technology. The people were wealthy, creative, and loved sports involving bulls. They ruled over other islands and even parts of the mainland. Sound familiar? It should. Almost everything in Plato's description matches what archaeologists found on Crete and in Minoan ruins. The palace at Knossos, for example, was huge. It had hundreds of rooms, twisting hallways, and beautiful paintings of bull leapers, athletes flipping over the backs of charging bulls. Now, about the disaster. Plato says Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods. The island disappeared into the sea. When scientists started digging on Santorini, ancient Thera, they found evidence of a huge volcanic explosion. It was one of the biggest eruptions in human history. The whole centre of the island blew apart, collapsing into the sea. Ash and pumice covered everything. The sea rushed in to fill the gap, creating a giant underwater crater. The eruption sent shockwaves across the region. Tsunamis smashed the coasts. Ash darkened the sky and ruined crops. To people living in the Bronze Age, it must have felt like the end of the world. Towns were buried. Whole communities vanished. The survivors struggled to rebuild, but their civilization never fully recovered. So you have an advanced island culture. You have palaces, art, plumbing, and bull games. You have a sudden disaster, earthquakes, floods, and the sea swallowing the land. It's easy to see how these stories could merge over time. But here's the thing. Plato never mentions Crete. He says Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most people think means outside the Mediterranean. But ancient Greeks didn't always use maps the way we do. Sometimes beyond just meant far away, or at the edge of the known world. And more importantly, Plato wasn't writing history. He was telling a story to make a point about pride, power, and what happens when a civilization grows too arrogant. Still, the details are too close to ignore. Over the years, many historians and scientists have wondered if Plato's Atlantis was inspired by stories of the Minoan collapse. Maybe the memory of the eruption and the fall of the palaces survived in Greek stories. Maybe those stories grew larger and stranger over centuries, turning into legend. Think about how people tell stories after a disaster. Details get mixed up. Places and times blur together. One generation talks about the Great Wave. The next says the island sank beneath the sea. Over centuries, the truth can turn into myth. Let's look at the evidence for this theory. Ancient Greeks knew about Crete and the Minoans, but by Plato's time, most of the details were lost. The palaces were already ruins, the language was forgotten. But the myths remained. The Greeks told stories about King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur, a monster trapped in a maze. They said Daedalus built the maze and Icarus flew too close to the sun. All of these tales are set in Crete, in a time of lost greatness. Now, add the eruption of Thera. Even centuries later, people would have seen the broken island, the sunken caldera, and the thick layers of ash. They would have heard stories from older generations, stories about a time when the sea turned deadly and the sky went dark. It's not hard to see how these memories could become the legend of Atlantis. There's another clue. Plato's story talks about bull games and a powerful queen. Atlantis was ruled by both kings and queens. The Minoans also had powerful female figures in their art and religion. Their queens and priestesses are everywhere in their frescoes. In Greek myths, Queen Pasiphae, wife of King Minos, plays a big role. That's unusual. Most ancient stories focus on kings, not queens. And then there's the labyrinth. The palace at Knossos is so big and complicated that early archaeologists called it a labyrinth. The word itself comes from labri, the double axe, a symbol found all over Minoan sites. The legend of the Minotaur trapped in a maze. It's probably a memory of the palace's twisting halls. So when you put all this together, it's easy to imagine how memories of the Minoans and the eruption of Thera got mixed into the Atlantis story. Not just in one moment, but over centuries of retelling. Now, let's talk about why this connection matters. Atlantis isn't just a fun story. It's a way of talking about how civilizations rise and fall, and how memories change over time. When Plato wrote about Atlantis, he was warning about the dangers of pride and forgetting your limits. The Minoan collapse is a real example of how even the most advanced society can disappear. But here's another angle. Atlantis became a symbol of lost knowledge. People dreamed about finding hidden wisdom, secret technology, or forgotten art buried under the sea. For hundreds of years, explorers searched for Atlantis, hoping to discover treasures or messages from the past. That dream started with Plato, but it took on a life of its own. In the Middle Ages, people thought Atlantis was somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. In the 1800s, writers claimed it was in the Caribbean, the Sahara, or even Antarctica. Each new generation added details, moving Atlantis farther and farther from its original story. But the core idea stayed the same: a great civilization lost in a sudden disaster, its secrets buried and forgotten. That's the heart of the Minoan story too. The palaces, the art, the language, even the people's names, all gone in a few generations. Let's get a little philosophical here. Why do we care so much about lost cities? Maybe it's because they remind us that nothing lasts forever, not even the best technology or the brightest culture. Maybe it's because we all fear losing what we love, or because we hope that something beautiful might survive, hidden just out of reach. Atlantis is a way of talking about hope and loss at the same time. It says maybe the world could be better, but it also says be careful, because everything can vanish. The story is comforting and scary at once. When archaeologists started finding the ruins of Crete on Santorini, buried under all that volcanic ash, it felt like finding a real Atlantis. There were streets, houses, pots, even paintings on the walls, everything frozen in time. Unlike Plato's Atlantis, this city didn't sink into the sea, but it was wiped out just as suddenly. The people vanished, leaving behind only their belongings and their art. Scientists used the layers of ash and broken pottery to piece together what happened. They found whole towns buried in a single day. They saw how the people lived, what they ate, what they made. It was a window into a lost world, one that looked almost exactly like the stories Plato told. But there's a twist. The real story of the Minoans and the eruption is messier than the legend. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It took decades, maybe even a century. There were survivors, rebuilders, and people who tried to keep the old ways alive. The memory of the disaster grew bigger and stranger as it passed from parent to child, from story to myth. So, did Plato know about the Minoans? Maybe. Or maybe he just heard echoes, the ghosts of the real disaster, still floating around in Greek culture. Maybe he used those fragments to build his own story, adding lessons and warnings for his own time. Modern scientists still argue about how much of Atlantis is real and how much is legend. Some say it's all just a parable. Others point to the clear links: the palaces, the bull games, the sudden destruction, the lost city under the sea. Even the timeline, once you ignore Plato's big numbers, fits with the fall of the Minoans and the eruption of Thera. But here's what's really interesting. The Atlantis story didn't just preserve the memory of a disaster. It kept alive the idea that something precious was lost, a whole way of life, a level of art and skill that people admired. Even when the details faded, the longing for that lost world stayed alive. In a way, Atlantis is more powerful as a legend than as a real place. It lets every generation imagine their own version of a lost paradise. For some, it's a warning about greed or pride. For others, it's a symbol of hidden wisdom or beauty. And for archaeologists, it's a reminder to keep digging, to keep searching for the truth under layers of ash and time. So, is Atlantis just a story? Or is it a memory of something real that happened in the Bronze Age? A civilization that rose, flourished, and then vanished in a storm of fire and water? The answer is probably both. The line between myth and history is thin. Sometimes the only way we remember the past is through stories that grew and changed long after the real events ended. That's why the Minoans matter, even now. Their world inspired legends that still shape how we think about lost civilizations. The ruins they left behind, palaces, art, buried cities, are the seeds of myths that never die. And every time someone dreams about finding Atlantis, they're really reaching back to the Minoans, to a time when the world was full of wonders and when even the strongest cultures could vanish in the blink of an eye. But the story doesn't end there. The ash that buried Crete and other towns did something amazing. It preserved a whole slice of life, waiting for us to find it again. What was lost in legend was saved in dust and stone, frozen for thousands of years. Next, we'll dive into what the ash kept safe, the real treasures and secrets of the lost Minoan world. Let's get into the heart of the mystery. What did the ash actually save from the lost world of Thera and the people who lived there? When you hear volcanic eruption, you probably picture total destruction. Fire, darkness, everything wiped out. And that's true for a lot of disasters. But sometimes the thing that destroys can also protect. That's what happened on Thera. When the volcano exploded, it sent out a rain of ash and tiny glass shards. The ash was so thick it covered everything. Roofs collapsed under the weight. Doors and windows were sealed shut. Streets, courtyards, and even gardens vanished under a heavy grey blanket. The people fled, but all the stuff they left behind stayed right where it was. And here's the strange part. The ash created a seal, like putting a lid on a box. No air, no water, no bugs could get in. Almost nothing decayed. So, what did archaeologists actually find when they started digging almost 3,500 years later? It's like someone pressed pause on a whole city. You see walls still painted with bright colours, pots and pans sitting on stoves, tables set for meals that never happened, tools and toys, jewellery dropped in a hurry, even footprints in the ash, frozen mid-step. Let's start with the buildings. The city at Crete wasn't just a random collection of huts. It was organised. Streets ran in neat lines. Houses rose 2 or 3 stories tall. Some had indoor staircases, wooden beams, and even skylights. The walls were built with stone and coated with smooth plaster. And the rooms weren't empty. They had beds, benches, and storage jars as tall as a person. The biggest surprise was the plumbing. Some houses had bathrooms upstairs, real toilets that flushed with water. Pipes made of clay carried waste away and brought in fresh water. These were not just fancy extras. They were built into the houses from the start. It's the kind of thing you expect in a modern home, not a Bronze Age town. And then there's the art. The ash saved thousands of paintings, what we call frescoes, on the walls and ceilings. These aren't just simple drawings. They're full of life and colour. You see blue monkeys climbing trees, young men boxing, women picking saffron flowers, ships sailing across the sea. There are fish, birds, dolphins, and even a whole parade of people dressed for festivals. One of the most famous paintings is called the Spring Fresco. It covers an entire room with flowers, swallows, and rolling hills. The colours are still bright after all these years. There's a kind of joy in these scenes, a love for nature and beauty. It doesn't feel dark or heavy. It feels alive. The ash also saved things you wouldn't expect. Pottery is everywhere. Some pots are plain, made for storage. Others are decorated with swirls, waves, and plants. There are tiny cups and giant jars, plates, bowls, lamps, and ladles. Some of the pottery was imported from Crete or mainland Greece, showing how far people traded. And then there are the tools. Bronze knives and saws, stone hammers, fishing hooks, looms for weaving cloth, There's even a bronze scale for weighing things, which tells us people were doing business, not just living day to day. You find grinding stones for flour, scrapers for cleaning animal skins, needles for sewing. It's a picture of daily life as frozen in place. Jewellery is another treasure. Gold earrings, silver pins and beads made from tiny shells or glass. Some beads are shaped like lilies or poppies. You can almost imagine someone putting them on in the morning, getting ready for a festival or a day at the market. Some of the gold is worked into shapes we still find beautiful, spirals, flowers and little animals. Now let's talk about the food. The ash wrapped up not just the pots and pans, but what was inside them. Archaeologists found grains, barley, wheat, lentils, still sitting in storage jars. There are olive pits, fig seeds, even carbonized bread. In some houses you find fish bones and animal remains, goat, sheep, pigs and cattle. All of this gives a clear picture of what people ate and how they cooked. They had bread, cheese, wine, honey, fruits, and plenty of seafood. And here's something wild. In the remains of kitchens they found measuring cups and strainers. People liked their food prepared just right. They even found what looked like spice racks, small pots with traces of herbs and dried plants. This wasn't just survival food, it was cuisine. What about the people themselves? Here's where it gets strange. For a long time, archaeologists found almost no human remains at Crete. Only a handful of teeth and scattered bones. No mass graves. No bodies frozen in panic, like at Pompeii. It looked like most people escaped before the final eruption. They had time to grab what they could and run for their lives. That's why so many valuables are missing. Most of the gold and fancy things were taken by the owners. What they left behind was the ordinary stuff. The pots, tools, furniture and half-finished meals. It's almost like the city was abandoned in a hurry, but not in total chaos. People locked their doors. They cleared out their valuables. That tells us the warning signs were clear enough that families had time to get out. Still, some things were too heavy to move or too common to bother. That's why we find big storage jars, built-in benches and wall paintings. The ash saved them all. Even wooden beams and furniture left marks in the ash, like shadows of the real thing. Sometimes the wood itself survived, turned to charcoal but still shaped like a chair or a ladder. Let's zoom in on the frescoes for a moment, because they tell a special story. The Flotilla fresco is one of the most detailed works ever found from the ancient world. It shows a fleet of ships sailing through a busy harbour. You see rowers, captains, dolphins swimming alongside. On shore there are crowds cheering, buildings with striped awnings, and hills dotted with goats and trees. What does this mean? It wasn't just a random painting. It was a snapshot of their world, a world full of travel, trade, and celebration. The artists cared about detail. They showed the way the sea moves, the curve of waves, the pattern of sails. There's pride in what they built and how they lived. In another room, you see young women gathering saffron, an expensive spice still prized today. Their dresses are bright, their jewellery detailed. You can tell a lot about fashion, work, and even religion from these scenes. Some figures are clearly priests or priestesses, holding sacred objects or standing in front of altars. There are also clues about their beliefs. Bulls appear again and again, not just in art but in clay models, stone carvings, and even in the layout of some buildings. Some rooms have double axes carved into the walls, a symbol that probably meant power or protection. The ash kept all these signs safe, letting us peek into their rituals and daily habits. Even the garbage is preserved. Piles of broken pottery, fish bones, and burned seeds show us what people tossed out. Sometimes the trash tells more than the treasures. You can see the change of seasons, more fish in spring, more grains in fall. You can track what people like to eat, what they made, and what they threw away. Outside the houses, the ash saved gardens and courtyards. Root holes show where trees grew. Sometimes you even find seeds and pollen trapped in the layers. That lets scientists figure out what plants were common: olive, grape, fig, barley, and poppy. The streets themselves are still visible, marked by cart tracks and footprints. All these details add up to something special. Akrotiri isn't just a pile of ruins, it's a whole city, caught in a moment. You can see how people moved through their homes, what they valued, and how they organised their days. But the evidence isn't just about stuff, it's about connections. The pottery found at Akrotiri comes from all over the Mediterranean. Some jars are Cretan, others from Cyprus, Egypt, or mainland Greece. There are signs of trade, seals, weights, even bits of writing scratched into clay. That means this city wasn't isolated. It was part of a network, sharing ideas, goods, and maybe even stories. The writing is a puzzle. Some clay tablets have symbols in a script called Linear A. Nobody has cracked the code yet. We know it's not Greek. It might be the language of Thera, or a local dialect of the Minoans. The ash saved these tablets from the weather and from being crushed. They're still waiting to be understood. There's another kind of evidence. What's missing? No weapons have turned up in any of the houses. No swords, armour, or shields. That suggests this was a peaceful place, not a military outpost. People felt safe enough to build with windows facing the street, to leave their doors unlocked, to paint their walls with scenes of joy instead of war. And then, the pets. Archaeologists found bones of dogs, cats, and even monkeys. Monkeys aren't native to the Aegean. They had to be brought by ship, probably from Egypt. That means people kept exotic animals as companions, maybe as status symbols. It adds a playful side to their world. All these finds raise bigger questions. What kind of society was this, really? The evidence points to a city that was wealthy, connected, and creative. People had jobs: potters, builders, traders, artists. There were farmers and fishermen, merchants and priests. Houses were different sizes, but even the small ones had nice things. That suggests less of a gap between rich and poor than in other ancient places. What happened to the survivors? That's a tougher question. The people who fled Akrotiri probably mixed into nearby islands or mainland Greece. Their traditions and skills may have lived on, hidden in other cultures. Some of the pottery styles and building tricks show up in places far from Thera after the eruption. One more thing. The ash saved more than just objects. It kept alive a way of thinking, a focus on art, comfort, and connection to nature. The frescoes are full of flowers, animals, and flowing shapes. Even the smallest rooms had painted borders or patterns. Beauty mattered, even in daily life. Scientists use the evidence from Akrotiri to piece together bigger patterns. For example, the way houses line up tells us about city planning. The mix of imported and local goods shows how trade worked. The art shows what people dreamed about. Every piece helps build a picture of a lost world. And here's where it gets philosophical for a second. The ash did more than freeze things in time. It created a message in a bottle, sent across ages, waiting for someone to open it. When archaeologists brush away the dust, they're not just finding objects. They're meeting people from the deep past, catching them in a moment of ordinary life. It's easy to feel a little awe when you think about it. Some of the fingerprints in the clay are from people who woke up, cooked breakfast, and then vanished from history. Their houses, their art, even their pets, saved by disaster, waiting for us to find them. And yet, not everything survived. The ash is a time capsule, but it's also a filter. Only the things that were trapped in place made it through. Anything left outside, anything made of fragile stuff like fabric or paper, is gone. The stories people told each other, the songs they sang, the sound of laughter in the courtyards, those are lost forever. Still, the evidence from Akrotiri gives us something rare. It's a real look at Bronze Age life, not just for the rich and powerful, but for ordinary people. You see what mattered to them: family, home, food, beauty, and maybe a sense of fun. When you add up all the objects, paintings, and clues, you get a story that's almost complete. Not a legend, but a real history. It's a reminder that under the right conditions, even disaster can become a kind of gift. The ash that destroyed Akrotiri also saved it, preserved the things people made, used and loved. And that's why scientists and dreamers keep coming back to this buried city. Every layer of ash, every painted wall, every forgotten tool brings us closer to understanding a world that vanished in an instant. The evidence is all around if you know where to look. Of course, not everything made it through. Some things were wiped out forever, leaving only questions and empty spaces behind. And that's where we turn next. The things the ash couldn't save, and what was lost for good. So much of what we know about the lost city on Thera comes from what the ash saved. But let's flip the question. What did the disaster erase? What can't we ever get back? That's where the real mystery starts to open up, and it's honestly kind of haunting. When you look at the ruins, you see a frozen moment. But you're looking through a tiny window. Everything outside that window is just gone. The ash worked like a camera flash. It caught what happened in that split second, but everything before or after is dark. And there's no rewind. There's no way to scroll back through time and see what we missed. Think about all the things that don't leave a trace. The most obvious is writing. Even though archaeologists found a few clay tablets with strange symbols, we have no books, no scrolls, no letters. If people were keeping records on paper or animal skins, those burned up instantly. If they had songs or poems written down, they're lost. We can only guess at the words people used, the stories they told, the names they whispered. And it's not just about the big things, it's the everyday moments. Imagine all the laughter, the arguments, the greetings in the street, the sound of children playing, the smell of a festival, the rhythm of songs passed from mother to daughter. Not a single piece of that survived. It's all in the air now, scattered like dust. Here's one example that always sticks with me: clothing. We know almost nothing about what people wore day to day. The paintings on the walls show some fancy outfits: bright skirts, patterned sashes, gold jewellery. But those are festival clothes, or maybe ceremonial costumes. What about work clothes? What did fishermen wear out on the boats? How did a farmer dress for a hot afternoon in the fields? The ash swallowed all the fabrics. Almost nothing made of wool, linen or leather survived. Maybe a few scraps, but that's it. And then there's music. The paintings show people dancing, maybe singing, maybe playing an instrument. But we don't know what their music sounded like. No written notes, no instruments that survived the fire and the centuries, not even a description from someone who heard a song and tried to capture it in words. The silence is total. What about beliefs? We have clues, statues, symbols, little shrines. There are hints in the art, like people holding offerings or standing before a bull. But we don't have their prayers. We don't know the words they spoke in times of fear or hope. We don't know the names of their gods except for a few guesses borrowed from other ancient cultures. The heart of their faith is gone. Food is another mystery. Sure, the ash preserved seeds and animal bones. But taste is more than ingredients. What spices did they use? How did a festival meal taste compared to a normal dinner? What foods meant comfort? Which ones were saved for special occasions? All the flavours, smells, and secret recipes are lost. You can look at a pile of lentils and know people ate them, but not how they turned them into a meal that tasted like home. Let's talk about language for a second. The writing found on Thera uses a script we can't read. It's called Linear A, and nobody has cracked it. It's a code left behind with no key. Even if someone figures it out tomorrow, it's just a piece. Most of the language was spoken, not written. The accents, the slang, the jokes, those are gone forever. It's like watching a movie, with the sound off. And here's something that's easy to miss. Faces. Archaeology can tell us about bones, sometimes even skin colour or height. But the real faces, the lines of a smile, the way a father looked at his child, the ways people look different from each other, those are erased. The paintings show idealised, almost cartoonish people. They don't give us the individuality, the spark of real life. Think about the knowledge that vanished. The city at Crete had plumbing, multi-storey houses, beautiful art. Those things took skill. Someone knew how to build a pipe that carried water uphill, or how to paint a wall so the colours would last. That knowledge was probably passed down by word of mouth, not in books. When the city fell and the survivors scattered, a lot of those secrets went with them. Maybe some skills survived in other places, but a lot just faded out. There's a bigger question too. What about the stories, the myths, the lessons, the warnings? Every culture has tales that teach and comfort. Don't go out at night, or the sea spirits will get you. This is how our people came to this island. This is what happens if you anger the gods. Without those stories, the culture's inner world is lost. The things that shaped how people made decisions, fell in love, or faced danger, they've all been wiped clean. And then there's the personal stuff. The things that never make it into history books. The dreams people had for their kids. The jokes between friends. The quiet moments on a rooftop looking out at the sea. The pets that had names. The boats that had stories. The secret places where lovers met. That's the stuff that's truly lost. No amount of digging will ever bring it all back. It's almost like the volcano didn't just destroy buildings. It erased a whole way of living and being. In a flash, the things that made that society unique disappeared. The stuff in the ash is real, but it's just a skeleton. The culture, the spirit, that's gone. Let's zoom out for a second. Imagine you're holding a puzzle. You've got a handful of pieces, and you can guess what the picture might be. But most of the pieces are missing. That's what historians deal with after a disaster like Thera. There's enough to spark your imagination, but not enough to know for sure. Here's another example, trade and travel. We know the people on Thera traded with Crete, Egypt, maybe even places as far away as Syria. But we don't know what stories they brought back. Did they hear myths from Egypt and retell them at home? Did sailors come back with wild tales about monsters in the deep? The web of connections is mostly invisible. We see the jars and the beads, but not the friendships, rivalries, or adventures that came with them. The city's layout shows planning, but we don't know who made the decisions. Was there a king, a council? Were women in charge, or men, or both? The frescoes show priests and priestesses, but not how power really worked. We don't know what happened when someone broke the rules. Was there jail, or a fine, or exile? No laws have survived, no court records, no lists of rulers or family trees. The whole system of government, whatever it was, is a blank. Another big loss: technology. The pipes and tools that survived are impressive, but those are just the things that happen to be made of stone or metal. What about inventions made of wood, or clever tricks that never left a mark? Maybe there were machines for weaving, or gadgets for fishing, or games for children made of sticks and shells. All of that vanished in the heat and the ash. Then there's the natural world. The ash preserves some seeds and roots, but not the gardens themselves. We don't know how people arranged their plants, what flowers they liked, or how they shaped their courtyards. If someone had a favourite tree or a hidden garden full of herbs, it's gone. The scents, the shade, the cool spots to rest on a hot day, none of that made it through. And think about the sea. The paintings show boats, but we don't have a single real ship from that time. No wrecks, no timbers, no sails. We know they crossed the water, but not what it felt like. Was sailing peaceful or terrifying? Did they sing as they rowed? Did they tell stories to pass the time? The sounds and sights of daily life on the water lost. Here's something that really hits me. The sense of time. We don't know what the people of Thera thought about the past or the future. Did they have a calendar? Did they celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, or special days? Did they mark the changing of seasons with rituals, or just notice the weather? All the ways people make sense of time. Gone. What about medicine? The city had bathrooms and drains, which shows they cared about cleanliness. But what did they believe about illness? Did they have doctors, or wise women with herbs? Did they know how to set a broken bone or cure a fever? The tools are gone. The knowledge is gone. The stories of healing and loss gone too. Let's not forget about childhood. The toys found in the ash are small clues. But childhood is more than toys. It's games, songs, family traditions. How did kids learn? Did they go to school or work with their parents? Did they have chores or was play their main job? The answers are lost. We're left with guesses. And then there's love. The paintings show couples, but we don't know what love meant to these people. Did they marry for love or for family? Were there secret romances? Did people write love letters or carve initials on a wall? The feelings, the heartbreaks, the hopes, they're out of reach. Even the disasters before the volcano are missing. Maybe there were smaller eruptions or storms or times of hunger. Maybe people remembered their grandparents' stories of tough years and tried to prepare. But if they did, those memories are gone. The lessons learned, the mistakes made, the advice passed down. They didn't survive the eruption. Let's talk about memory itself. The survivors who ran from Thera carried memories in their heads and hearts. But as they moved, settled in new places, learned new languages, those memories faded. Maybe a few stories were told to children. Maybe a song or a recipe survived, mixed into a new culture. But most memories just drifted away, like footprints washed off the beach. Even the animals lost their roles. We know people kept pets, but we don't know how they felt about them. Were dogs just guards, or part of the family? Did kids name their cats, or were they there to keep mice away? The bonds between people and animals, the quiet companionship, the nicknames, the little rituals, all vanished. And here's a different angle. Humour. Every society jokes about something. Maybe people in Crete teased each other about being late, or told stories about foolish neighbours. Maybe there were festivals full of laughter, or clever puns in their language. None of that made it through. The world of the past feels serious and silent, but that's just because laughter leaves no trace. Sometimes, even the things we do find are hard to understand. We see symbols and patterns but don't know what they mean. Was a spiral just decoration, or did it have a secret meaning? Was a certain colour reserved for special people? Were some shapes lucky and others risky? The codebook is missing, and the biggest loss might be the sense of connection. In the end, all we have are pieces. The people who built Crete, who loved and lost, who dreamed and worked, are gone. Their world was whole, but now it's scattered. So, what do we do with all this loss? Maybe it's a reminder. It tells us that history isn't just about objects or ruins. It's about the lives that slipped away without a sound. It's about how fragile memory is, how quickly a world can vanish. But maybe, just maybe, some things survive in ways we can't see. Maybe a story told to a child in a new land, or a recipe cooked in a distant kitchen, or a melody hummed by a stranger carries a little bit of that lost world forward. We'll never know the full story, but we can feel the weight of what's missing. That's what makes the mystery of Thera so powerful. It's not just about what we find, it's about what we can never find again. And in a strange way, that makes the things we do discover even more precious. Every painted wall, every broken pot, every tiny clue is a gift from the past, handed to us by accident. As we move toward the end of this story, it's worth pausing to think about all the things that slip through our fingers. The voices, the laughter, the dreams, lost forever, but not forgotten. At least, not as long as we keep wondering and searching and imagining what might have been. Let's jump forward. After all that loss, you might wonder, what does Santorini look like now? What happened to that ash-covered island after the world moved on? It's easy to picture the place as some haunted ruin, empty and silent. But that's not the story at all. The story of modern Santorini is strange, hopeful, and full of surprises. First, take a look at the island itself. If you see it from above, it doesn't look like a normal island. It's shaped like a crescent moon, curving around a deep blue bay. That bay is actually the old volcanic crater. The volcano collapsed into itself, making a huge hole that filled with seawater. The cliffs around the bay rise up fast. Some are over 900 feet tall. The rock is mostly black or red, with layers of white ash. It's wild to think that the shape of the island is the volcano's scar. Every curve, every jagged edge is from that ancient explosion. Now look at the villages. Most people live high on the cliffs, not down by the water. The most famous towns like Fira and Oya almost seem to float above the sea. Houses are painted white with blue doors and domes. They look like sugar cubes scattered on a rocky ledge. The sun hits the walls and makes everything shine. It's beautiful, but it's also practical. The white paint helps keep the houses cool in the boiling Greek summers. The blue domes aren't just for show either. Some say they keep away evil spirits. Others say they match the colour of the sea. Either way, it's a style that's been copied all over the world. But here's something interesting. The way people build on Santorini is shaped by disaster. For centuries, people were scared of more eruptions, so they dug their homes partly into the rock. These cave houses are cool in summer, warm in winter, and protected from earthquakes. The walls are thick, made from volcanic stone and ash. You'd never guess, just by looking, that the design comes from fear and memory. Life on Santorini has never been easy. The soil is rocky and dry. There's almost no fresh water, just a little rain, and not much at that. For most of history, the island was poor. People grew vines and a few tough vegetables. They fished, raised goats, and made wine. The sea was both a blessing and a threat. It brought trade and news, but also pirates and storms. For a long time, the island was a quiet backwater, far from the world's big events. But something changed in the last 100 years. People started to realize that the very things that made Santorini hard to live on made it special. The black sand beaches, the wild cliffs, the views of the caldera. All of that was rare. Artists and travellers came first, then scientists, then ordinary tourists. Little by little, the island became famous. Now, more than 1 million people visit every year. They come for the sunsets, the food, and the strange beauty of the place. Tourism brought money. The old cave houses turned into hotels. The small vineyards became world-class wineries. The island started to thrive. But things aren't perfect. The rush of visitors puts pressure on water supplies, roads, and even the old stones. There are worries about how much more the island can take. Still, for many people, Santorini is a dream, a place where the past and present are tangled together. Let's get specific. Scientists are still fascinated by Santorini. The volcano is still there, sleeping but not dead. In fact, it's one of the most closely watched volcanoes on Earth. There are sensors all over the island measuring tiny shakes in the ground, changes in the temperature of the sea, and even the smell of gases rising from cracks. Every year, geologists run tests to make sure nothing's about to happen. In 2011 and 2012, the ground started to swell a little, and small earthquakes shook the island. For a few months, everyone was nervous, but nothing big happened. The volcano is quiet for now. That's not the only thing scientists are interested in. The ruins of Crete, the lost city buried by ash, are still being dug up bit by bit. Archaeologists work slowly, brushing away layers of dust looking for new clues. They use drones, radar, and every tool you can imagine. Every few years they find something that changes what we thought we knew. A new fresco, a forgotten street, a strange object with no clear purpose. Each find adds to the puzzle. But here's a twist. The people who live on Santorini today aren't the direct descendants of the Minoans. The island was empty for a long time after the eruption. Later, new settlers arrived from mainland Greece and other islands. They brought their own languages, customs, and gods. Over time, the old stories faded. The ruined city was buried deep, and the past was forgotten by most. Still, some old things survived in odd ways. For example, the way people grow grapes on Santorini is unique. The vines are twisted into low circles, almost hugging the ground. This protects them from the strong winds and the harsh sun. The soil is full of ash, which helps the vines survive without much water. The grapes are small and tough, but they make wine with a sharp mineral taste. People say you can taste the volcano in every glass. It's a flavour that comes from disaster, turned into something to celebrate. Food on Santorini is shaped by history too. Because water is scarce, people learned to cook with what they had. They make tomato fritters from tiny sweet tomatoes that grow in the ash. They bake bread from barley and dip it in olive oil. Cheese is made from goat's milk because cows wouldn't survive on the dry hills. Even the seafood is special. Octopus, squid, and tiny fish that are grilled and eaten whole. Every meal is a lesson in making the best of what you have. The people of Santorini have a reputation for being tough and creative. They had to be. The island is isolated and the land is stingy. For centuries, people worked hard just to get by. Families stuck together. Traditions lasted. There are old songs and dances that are only heard here. Some stories hint at the ancient past, but most are about daily life, storms, ships, and the stubbornness it takes to survive on a rock in the sea. Religion on the island is mostly Greek Orthodox now, but there are hints of older beliefs if you look closely. There are festivals for saints that mix Christian and local traditions. Some shrines are built on top of ancient ruins. People light candles for luck or hang offerings in caves. The line between old and new is blurry. The landscape itself feels timeless. There are paths that wind through vineyards and over hills. Wildflowers bloom in spring, covering the black rocks with colour. The sea changes colour with the weather, sometimes deep blue, sometimes silver, sometimes almost black. The wind can be fierce, rattling shutters and shaking the doors. At night the sky is full of stars, and you can see the curve of the caldera by moonlight. It's easy to imagine the island as it was, and as it could be. There's another way the past lingers. Every few decades, someone proposes a new theory about Atlantis or lost civilizations. Tourists ask about the legend. Locals smile, but some take the story seriously. There are even a few who claim their families have always known that the island holds secrets. They tell stories of hidden tunnels, buried gold, or ancient curses. Most of it is just talk, but it adds to the feeling that Santorini is a place where anything could happen. Even the buildings carry memories. Some of the churches are built with stones taken from older temples. The streets twist and turn, following lines that may go back to ancient times. There are walls that have stood for hundreds of years, patched and rebuilt after every earthquake. Balconies hang over the cliffs, held up by wooden beams that have soaked up the salty air for generations. The sea is still at the centre of life. Ferries come and go, bringing supplies and people. Fishermen work at dawn, checking nets and hauling in their catch. Boats for tourists circle the caldera, showing off the black beaches and hot springs. On summer nights, you can hear music from open windows and see the lights of ships moving in the distance. The rhythm of the sea is steady, even as everything else changes. Let's not forget the volcano itself. It's not just a threat, it's also a source of pride. People tell stories of how their ancestors survived eruptions, rebuilt, started over. There's a sense that the island has been tested and survived. Some even say the volcano is a symbol of beauty and danger living side by side. The black rocks and steep cliffs remind everyone that life here depends on luck as much as skill. Tourism has changed the economy, but it's also created new challenges. In the summer, the island can feel crowded. The narrow roads fill with buses and scooters. Prices go up, and some locals worry that old ways are being lost, but others see it as a chance to share their home with the world. There's a balance to be found between past and present, tradition and change. Here's something that gets overlooked. Even though Santorini is famous, most people on the island live quiet lives. Kids go to school, elders gather in the shade to talk, shopkeepers greet neighbours by name. There are weddings, funerals and birthday parties. Life goes on just like anywhere else. The volcano isn't always on people's minds. Most days it's just part of the background, a mountain rising over the sea. But sometimes the past breaks through. Every now and then, heavy rain will wash away soil and reveal a bit of old pottery or a piece of wall. Farmers find ancient coins in their fields. Builders hit ruins when digging foundations. Each discovery is a reminder that the island has layers, modern life on top, ancient life underneath. It's a kind of living history. The ruins of Crete are protected now. There are walkways for visitors, and scientists are careful not to damage anything. But there's always the sense that more secrets are hidden below. People wonder what else lies buried, waiting to be found. Some even hope for a message from the past, a tablet, a painting, a clue that unlocks the mystery of what was lost. Santorini's story isn't just about disaster, it's about survival too. The island has been knocked down more than once, by volcanoes, earthquakes, and even invaders. Each time, people have rebuilt. Sometimes they kept old traditions, sometimes they invented new ones. The island's beauty comes from both its wounds and its strength. It's strange to think that a place so famous for destruction is now a symbol of beauty and hope. People come from all over the world to see the sunset from Oya, or to swim in the blue water of the caldera. They take pictures, eat local food, and try to imagine what life must have been like in the past. Some are drawn by the legend of Atlantis, others just want to relax. But everyone feels something when they stand at the edge of the cliffs and look out at the sea. The story of Santorini isn't finished. The volcano still sleeps beneath the surface. The ruins are still being uncovered. New stories are being written every day by people who live, work, and dream on the island. The mystery of what was lost is always there, but so is the proof of what survived. That's what makes modern Santorini so fascinating. It's a place where you can see the scars of the past and the hope of the future, side by side. The island stands as a reminder that even after the worst disasters, life can start again. Beauty and loss, memory and change, they're all part of the same story. As you think about Santorini now, picture the white houses shining in the sun, the dark cliffs rising from blue water, and the quiet promise that comes after every storm. The island isn't just a ruin or a tourist spot, it's a living example of how history keeps going, no matter what gets lost along the way. And as the day ends and the sky turns gold, there's a feeling that the story isn't over yet. There's always something left to discover, something waiting in the shadows, or in the dust, or in the eyes of someone who calls the island home. That's the magic of Santorini. Old and new, broken and beautiful all at once. If you've made it this far, you might be wondering what all of this really means. Why does the story of a lost civilization, a volcano, and a sunken island still matter today? Why does it grab our attention, even after so much time has passed? Let's try to break it down, piece by piece, and see if we can find some answers in the dust and the myths. Start with the basics. When you look at the end of the Minoans and the story of Santorini, you aren't just looking at local disaster, you're staring at a turning point for the whole region. The eruption didn't just blow up an island, it sent waves, real and cultural, across the Mediterranean. Trade networks broke, kingdoms shifted. People had to adapt or move or disappear. It's like tossing a rock into a pond and watching the ripples spread out in every direction. But here's the thing. History is full of these moments. Sometimes they're slow, sometimes sudden. Sometimes we see them coming, sometimes not. The story of Santorini is a reminder that even the strongest places can be shaken. Even the most advanced cultures can face something they didn't expect. Now there's something else that sticks out. The mystery. Even with all our science and digging, there's so much we just don't know. We have ruins, pottery, and burned layers of earth. We have legends and half-remembered stories, but we're always working with pieces, never the whole puzzle. That's both frustrating and exciting. It leaves room for questions, for imagination, and for hope that maybe tomorrow someone will find a clue that changes everything. Think about what's missing. We don't have the words of the people who lived through this. No diaries, no letters, no stories written down in a language we can read. We have to guess what people felt as they watched the sky turn black, as the sea pulled away, as the ground shook under their feet. Were they scared? Angry? Did they know what was happening? Or did it just seem like the end of the world? We'll probably never know for sure. And that gap, what's missing, makes the whole thing feel even bigger. At the same time, what we do find is amazing. The art left behind in the ruins of Crete is full of life and colour. Even after thousands of years, the paintings show people swimming, fishing, gathering flowers. There are no portraits of kings or battles, just daily life, wild nature and bright dreams. It's easy to think of ancient people as distant or strange, but these pictures make them feel close. You can almost imagine them walking the streets, laughing with friends watching the sea, and that's important. Because when we look at ancient disasters, it's easy to focus on the loss. But people kept going. After the ash settled, after the waves died down, life found a way forward. Maybe not the same as before, but something survived. New people came. New ways of living and building and telling stories took root. The world changed, but it didn't end. Let's talk about something else. Why do stories like this stick with us? What is it about lost cities and sudden disasters that pulls us in? Part of it is the mystery, sure. But maybe it's also because we see ourselves in these old stories. We know how it feels to face things we can't control. We know what it's like to rebuild after something falls apart. The details are different, but the heart of it is the same. There's also the power of nature. The eruption on Santorini wasn't something anyone could have stopped. It was huge, unstoppable, and totally outside of human plans. We like to think we're in charge, but nature has the last word. That's both scary and humbling. It reminds us that the ground under our feet isn't always as solid as it seems. But there's another layer too. The way people remember and tell these stories changes over time. What started as a real disaster turned into legend. The tale of Atlantis gets mixed up with the ruins of Crete. New meanings are added. People use the old story to talk about pride, loss, or hope. Each generation reshapes the past to fit what it needs, and the questions never really end. Was Atlantis real? Did the Minoans inspire the legend? Or are we just connecting dots that don't actually go together? Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe part of the magic is that we'll never have a final answer. What about today? We're still learning from Santorini and the Minoans. Scientists study the volcano to understand what might happen in the future. Archaeologists keep digging, hoping for new discoveries. Even the way grapes are grown, the way houses are built, and the way people tell stories on the island all come from lessons learned long ago. The past is never just behind us. It shapes the present in ways we don't always see. Let's zoom out for a second. The story of Santorini isn't just about one island or one explosion. It's a snapshot of something bigger. Cultures rise and fall. Cities are built, destroyed, and rebuilt again. People move, adapt, and keep going. The details change, but the pattern repeats across history. We see it in Rome, in Egypt, in places all over the world. Santorini just happens to show it in a dramatic way. It's also a reminder that sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. The volcano destroyed a way of life, but it also created new land, new soil, and new chances for people who came later. The ruins left behind became a treasure for the future, a way for us to see how people lived, dreamed, and survived. Here's something else that matters. The story of Santorini is a story of memory. Every time someone visits the island, walks through the ruins, or looks out over the caldera, they're connecting with the past. Every glass of wine, every old song or festival is a thread tying today to yesterday. Even if the original people are long gone, something of their spirit remains. It's easy to think of history as a list of dates and facts. But it's really a story about people, messy, creative, stubborn, hopeful. Santorini reminds us of that. The ruins aren't just stones. They're the leftovers of lives lived with all the same hopes and fears we have now. And there's still so much left to find. Every year, new tools give us a better look below the surface. Maybe someday we'll find writing that unlocks the secrets of Crete. Maybe not. The not knowing is part of what keeps the story alive. It's worth thinking about how we tell these stories in our own time. We use science, but also imagination. We build on what's been found, but we also fill in the gaps. Myths and facts mixed together. Sometimes that's confusing, but it's also what gives these stories power. They aren't just cold facts, they're living things, changing as we pass them on. So what can we take from all of this? Maybe it's this. Nothing lasts forever, but that isn't always bad. Change is part of life. Sometimes it comes slowly, sometimes all at once. Either way, people find ways to go forward. The world is full of second chances and new beginnings, even after disaster. Santorini stands as proof of that. It's a scar and a jewel, a reminder and a warning, all in one. It shows us how beauty can come from destruction, how strength can grow from loss, and how even the oldest wounds can become something new. And maybe that's the real lesson. We can't hold back the sea or stop the ground from shaking, but we can learn, remember, and try again. We can turn disaster into story, story into hope, and hope into something real. As you drift off tonight, let your mind wander back to the island. Imagine the houses shining in the sun, the cliffs standing guard over blue water, and the deep quiet that comes when the world resets itself. The people who live there are gone, but their dreams, their art, and their stubborn will to survive still echo in the wind. History doesn't end. It just changes shape. And maybe, somewhere under the ashen stone, there's still a message waiting for us. A promise that nothing is ever truly lost, as long as someone remembers.